and the Olympic team to give me that moment. Give me that moment, because it's not a moment of the ceremony. They give me that moment.
There's a collision coming, not a metaphorical one. A literal, scheduled, unavoidable collision between a 20-year-old from Quezon City and a converted exhibition hall in Linz, Austria, that was never built to hold what she carries with her. And the people who run that tournament knew it was coming. They watched it happen in Melbourne. They watched it happen in Dubai. They watched it in the California desert at Indian Wells when fans were still in the stands past midnight, wrapped in blankets, holding signs in Tagalog. They watched all of it, confirmed Alex's entry into the draw on April 6th, and then did absolutely nothing. That's the story. And by the time most people realize it's a story, it'll already be too late. Let's start with what the Linz Open actually is, not the promotional version, the real version. It's a converted exhibition hall on Europaplatz in the middle of Linz, Austria. Not a purpose-built tennis stadium. Not a facility designed to absorb the kind of crowd energy that follows Alex everywhere she goes now. The tournament came back to life in 2023 after a 20-year absence, got a WTA 500 upgrade in 2024, and has been running a 4-tier ticket structure, premium, Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, for years. That system was designed for a loyal local Austrian fan base, some regional tennis tourists, maybe a few visiting supporters from neighboring countries. The people who built that ticketing policy were thinking about the kind of audience that has quietly supported this event since 1987. They were absolutely not thinking about overseas Filipino workers flying in from Vienna, Frankfurt, and Zurich. They were not thinking about fan clubs coordinating group travel from London and Amsterdam. They were not running any numbers at all on what happens when the fastest rising women's player in the sport by social media momentum shows up at a fixed capacity building whose box office opened months before her name was even in the draw. That is problem number one. But to understand why it matters so much, you have to go back to January. The Australian Open is one of the 4 biggest tennis events on earth. Melbourne Park is built for serious crowd volume. Tens of thousands of seats across multiple show courts. When the scheduling team put Alex on court 6, they were looking at her ranking at the time, 49th in the world, and making a standard decision. Within hours, that decision looked embarrassing. The queue for her match stretched toward Rod Laver Arena. Thousands of Filipino fans who had valid ground passes couldn't get within sight of the court. People who had traveled interstate and in some cases internationally were watching on outdoor screens because the venue had filled completely. Tennis journalist Jose Morgado called the scheduling decision publicly just dumb. It became an international news story before the first set was finished. Every tournament director in the WTA watched that unfold. The Linz Open watched it unfold. So here is the question that matters. What did they do with that information? Based on everything publicly available from their official website and their communications, the answer is nothing. No expanded capacity announcement. No fan zone for international visitors. No acknowledgement in any press release that this tournament was about to host a player whose name in a draw causes literal traffic disruptions outside the venue. The ticket policy sat exactly where it had always been. 4 categories. No group accommodation infrastructure, no outreach to the Filipino community in Austria, and that community absolutely exists and is absolutely aware that Alex is about to play 90 minutes from Vienna by rail. Now, you might think that's an oversight. That tournament organizers just didn't anticipate the scale of it. But here's why that argument doesn't hold. Alex confirmed her participation in the Linz Open in the final week of March. April 6th is the first day of main draw play. That window is narrow, but it is not so narrow that a functioning operations team couldn't issue a public statement addressing capacity concerns, coordinate with local Austrian Filipino community organizations, or at the absolute minimum update their FAQ page with guidance for international fans traveling specifically to watch one player. The FAQ on the Linz Open website currently covers re-entry scanning, ATM locations, and taxi ranks near the Courtyard Marriott. It says nothing. Nothing about what happens when a 20-year-old from Quezon City draws a crowd that the building was never designed to hold. There's something specific about the people who follow Alex that makes this worse. These aren't casual fans who found her through an algorithm and might show up if it's convenient. The people turning up at her matches have built their schedules around her tournament calendar. At Indian Wells 3 weeks ago, fans were photographed in the stands past midnight in the cold California desert, wrapped in blankets, waiting for a first-round result to finish. When the match ended and she'd won in 3 sets, the crowd that had stayed through all of it roared. A sign in the front row read, in Tagalog, "Fight Alex." At that hour, in those conditions, those fans were still there. That is the level of commitment the Linz Open ticket policy has no mechanism for. And here is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable for the tournament, because there's money involved. Alex's presence in the draw is directly linked to increased ticket demand. Her matches in Dubai sold out her entire quarterfinal run. In a city with a large Filipino community, fans mobilized specifically for her. At Indian Wells, her practice sessions drew crowds comparable to Alcaraz. BNP Paribas Open executive Philippe Dor told Front Office Sports directly after Indian Wells, "We love every minute of it, we benefit from it, we promote it." The Linz Open benefits from Alex's entry in exactly the same way. Her name raises the international profile of a tournament that before the 2024 WTA 500 upgrade, most global tennis fans couldn't have found on a map. But here is the line that exposes everything. Benefiting from her draw and actually accommodating the people who follow her are two completely different decisions. The Linz Open has committed enthusiastically to the first one. There is no visible evidence of any commitment to the second. That gap between revenue appetite and operational preparation is precisely what the ticket policy is revealing right now. And then there's Rafa. Nadal is not a background character in this story. He trained with Alex in November 2025, his first time back on a tennis court in over a year since his retirement, and he chose Instagram to tell the world about it. 1 year later, it felt great to be back on a tennis court. Alex thanked him in the comments. The relationship between the Rafa Nadal Academy and the player it has developed since she was 13 years old is foundational to everything she is now. She left Quezon City for Mallorca at 13. She trained at his academy. She became the first Filipino to win a junior Grand Slam title at the 2022 US Open while still in that program. The top 30 ranking, the Miami semifinal run, the first Grand Slam match win for the Philippines in the Open era, all of it traces back directly to the decision to put her in that environment. Nadal has watched every stage of that development. He has said publicly that watching her grow as a player gives him genuine satisfaction. That is not the language of someone who remains neutral when the institutions around her fall short. Consider the geography here. Linz is a European tournament. His continent. His tennis culture. When a WTA event sitting in his backyard takes the commercial benefit of his academy's most prominent graduate, pockets the revenue her name generates, and leaves the Filipino fans who traveled specifically for her standing outside a venue that didn't prepare, that lands differently than Melbourne or Miami doing the same thing. Nadal does not stay quiet when the sport he gave everything to gets treated carelessly. What is unfolding in Linz is careless. The ticket policy proves it. And the proximity makes it impossible to look away. Now let's talk about Alex herself for a moment, because she's the one who actually has to walk out there and play. She has said openly that she has a lot of room to improve on clay. She is 20 years old. She went 2 wins and 4 losses on clay in 2025. Indoor clay is a surface she hasn't competed on before this tournament. The field around her includes Alexandrova, Raducanu, Tauson, Ostapenko, Navarro. This is a serious draw on a surface that isn't her strongest. The weight of performing well under those conditions while simultaneously carrying the expectations of a fanbase this size, that is a genuine athletic challenge. And the last thing those fans deserve is a ticket policy working against them at the door before the first ball is even struck. This is not about whether the Linz Open is a bad tournament. There is a version of this story where they get credit for hosting something remarkable. A WTA 500 on indoor clay, a strong field, and a player who sells out venues globally making her first appearance in Austria. That version was available to them. It required coordinating with the Austrian Filipino diaspora, issuing capacity guidance in advance, publicly acknowledging the international interest, building something around the moment. That version is no longer available. What is currently unfolding is a ticket structure that will turn hundreds of fans away from a building they traveled to in good faith, while the tournament collects the revenue from the seats that did sell and moves on to the next week. And here's what makes this feel inevitable rather than accidental. This didn't happen in a vacuum. Every decision the Linz Open made, or didn't make, came after Melbourne, after Dubai, after Indian Wells. After every piece of evidence this season made the scale of what follows Alex completely impossible to misread. The scheduling chaos in Australia was global news. The Dubai sellouts were covered across sports media. The Indian Wells midnight crowd in the California desert was photographed and shared widely. The tournament had all of that information. They confirmed her entry and made no visible operational adjustment. At some point, that stops being an oversight. It becomes a choice. When the situation in Linz becomes a story, and it will become a story, because the mismatch between Filipino fan demand and design center Linz capacity is not a hypothetical, it is a collision with a confirmed date on the calendar. The conversation about what should have been done will already be too late. The fans will be outside the building. The venue will be at capacity. The gap between what this tournament gained from Alex's entry and what it gave back to the people who make her presence valuable will be visible to everyone watching. Nadal built the foundation of what she is. He knows what she carries with her every time she walks through a tunnel and onto a court. He knows what that community following her represents. When this moment arrives in Linz, and the story spreads the way these stories always spread, his reaction is not going to be quiet. The Linz Open made a business decision when they confirmed Alex's entry. They chose not to make the operational decisions that should have followed. And when this erupts, which is the only question left, which day does it happen? The tournament will find out what the rest of the WTA already learned this season. You can benefit from Alex, or you can ignore the people who follow her. But you cannot do both without consequence. The ticket policy was always going to prove it. Linz just confirmed it by doing absolutely nothing at all.